Hey everybody, it's Elon from the Eggard podcast. And last week we had someone on talking about the transgender movement. We had a little debate, and someone in the comment section was nice enough to come on board very respectfully, give their opinion, and actually said that they'd be willing to come on and debate as well. We have Mary here today, so I appreciate you doing this. Can I just say one thing right off the bat? We have not had one person outside of Gil up until now willing to talk to us, and now we have two in 1 week. So I'm very thankful for that, and I appreciate you doing it. I know it's not hard to. I know it's very hard to come on and have these discussions. So appreciate it.
Of course.
So why don't we learn a little bit about you?
Right. So my name is I can go by either Ray or Mary. Um I haven't transitioned yet, but I do plan to transition in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I felt like this is something that's important to me because I've struggled with gender dysphoria since I was 3 years old, and I feel like there's a lot of conversations kind of just going around that really fail to touch on things that are really important for people who are trans and have gender dysphoria. So yeah.
Sure. And are you in school? Are you working?
I'm in school. I'm in my last year of college.
What are you studying, if you don't mind me asking?
Creative writing.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so look, I love to have these conversations. I think they're very important. Like you said, people aren't really having conversations where both sides, I guess you could call it, are talking to each other honestly. So, I could tell right away you were willing to do that. So I think we should just jump right in. And I know you saw the last conversation I had with Gil, right? You watched the whole thing.
I did.
Now, so there's a lot to cover because there's some key things I think. Like he said, why am I worried about the erasure of men and women, right? And I said because let's just get the big one out of the way. There seems to be no more definition of what a man is and what a woman is.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Like you saw that segment of that debate.
Yeah. So I mean, I can definitely see where the concern comes in. And I think we changed the definitions a lot, or at least we've tried to. At least a lot of people, I guess, on the left have um, to be more inclusive of trans people. But I guess personally, I'm not sure if I feel like they're doing that in the right way. Um, from my experience, most trans people, we don't want to like erase the definition of men and women. We don't want to make men and women an entirely different thing than what it is now. We just want to be accepted into that definition. And I think where the confusion comes in is when I have nothing against people who are like non-binary or gender fluid, but I think the confusion comes in when you have a lot of people who identify more so as non-binary and gender fluid, want to also be a part of transgender discussions, and then it becomes it becomes a thing where you need to, or at least where you feel like you have to change the definitions in order to be inclusive of people like that.
But so you're saying this is my confusion. You're saying you don't want to change the definition. You want a man to still be a man and a woman to still be a woman, but you want to be included in that definition. But
Right.
based on what criteria, if there's going to be a definition, in other words, if I'm to say a man is a biological man, and then we say, but we're also going to include trans people who identify as men within that group, what is the standard then? What is the actual definition then?
So for a trans person, now it really would depend. For me, I feel like if it's a trans man who suffers with gender dysphoria and has suffered with gender dysphoria for all or most of their life, and I feel like they should be able to be accepted as a man without changing the definition of what a man is. Now, they may not be able to reproduce like sexually the way a biological male might, but I think in that case it could just be an exception to the rule because it's just trans people are less than 0.1% of the population. So I mean, I get where, if you want to define things entirely based on your physical biology, but that would be something that's important. But I think in the case of trans people, it's just a minor exception and it's to the rule. I don't think it changes the rule, it's just an exception to that rule.
So the problem is with that is that it becomes a completely, I guess you could say, ambiguous definition at that point. It still is a man is a biological man, except in the cases where a man is someone who identifies as a man. What's very interesting, what I will say off the bat, is that you use the term gender dysphoria, which a lot of people in the trans community that I've had interactions with or pro-trans people are against. So it's interesting that you actually do you see it as gender dysphoria as someone who has some kind of condition where they genuinely believe they are essentially. So one is saying that there's a something going on mentally taking place. The other one is saying that no, there's not something mentally going on. And I'm trying to be very sensitive in how I approach this, but the other side of it is, and the majority of the trans movement right now, at least that's vocal, saying no, this is not dysphoria. We actually are the other gender. We actually are supposed to be just accepted as the other gender. That is what we are. And we might be in the wrong body, but there's no mental issue associated with this.
So this is an issue that I do have with, I guess, the more mainstream trans movement. I would say that gender dysphoria is a mental issue, and I definitely feel like even whether it's a mental issue or not, if you're trans, then you have to have gender dysphoria. So I definitely disagree with the mainstream trans movement on that. So it is a mental issue, but from what research we have on gender dysphoria, and this is in the DSM as well as in various other academic journals who've researched this, the treatment for that is to allow that person to live as the gender that they feel like they were. And this is also where some change in definition for, I guess, what a man and a woman is comes in. Some people will say that you should, that gender and sex are distinct things. And I can see why some people would disagree with that. But I guess when they say that, mainly what they're referring to is people with gender dysphoria, even though they are, say, assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. Since they were little, or sometimes even since before they can even remember, they've always identified with the other gender. They may not have called it transgender because that's obviously a term that came about recently.
So can I just say this? I do draw a distinction between people who genuinely suffer from gender dysphoria like yourself, and then people who, what I called in that video, that previous debate, a social phenomenon, right, which is coming through, call it whatever you want, left-wing ideology that's permeated society where people don't have self-value anymore, and they're just latching on to any identity that they feel gives them value. And I feel that those people are appropriating people who genuinely suffer from gender dysphoria like yourself, and they're doing it so that they can be involved in a trend. Do you believe that that's actually happening? Or
I think it's definitely happening. I've seen the whole thing happen just over the years. I don't know if I would use the word appropriating because I know people like this. And I don't think they're mean people or bad people. I don't think they're intentionally trying to appropriate what being transgender or having gender dysphoria is. I think it's a societal issue that. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I think it's a societal issue that comes down to a whole lot of, I guess, a lot of other struggles we have in our society that's causing people to do this. But it's definitely something that's happening, and it is a social phenomenon.
So I'm going to jump back to the hardest topics because I rarely encounter people who are willing to have a conversation with me about this. And so I just want to deep dive into it. So if we're to accept that a man is a biological man, that's the definition, but there are exceptions to the rule where someone is genuinely suffering from gender dysphoria. And like I said in the previous debate, again, this is where I couldn't get an answer. When it comes to areas of life where we have to measure someone, where there's consequence for the other sex, meaning shelters for women who have been abused. We're looking at prisons, even combat sports, those type of areas, right? There are risk factors at play. What's your vision for how we deal with those situations?
Yeah. So I think it really should be on a case by case basis. I think one thing I do want to note is, like you mentioned it earlier, there's a large social phenomenon of a whole lot of people who don't have what's called early onset gender dysphoria, who identify as trans, and so that makes things a lot more confusing when you are looking at safe spaces for women and things like that, or just dividing society based on sex. It makes things a lot more confusing. But in a whole lot of these things, like for example, with combat sports, there are actually no trans people, at least that I know of, who are actually involved in combat sports at all. You do
There
have
are.
people who identify as trans,
Mhm.
but personally, based on what I know about trans people, those people are not trans. Those are just, I don't want to be rude, but they are. I think most
Okay,
of
but that points to the problem, right? I mean, that points to the problem that we have a biological man who, for whatever reason, is now identifying as a woman, whether it's genuine or not, and they're going into combat sports and damaging women, or vice versa, or not vice versa, but in other areas like shelters or prisons where we've seen that happen.
right.
And so I think when a lot of people, like I said, when they get nervous about this stuff, when they feel like there's an erasure, we're letting biological men. I have no doubt, just talking to you for what it's been now 10 minutes, that you suffer from gender dysphoria, that whatever you're going through, you're genuine about it. You're 100% able to communicate it. So I do understand, and this is where I empathize fully. I empathize fully with someone like yourself, who I feel gets the worst end of it, because the trans movement, I feel, is not representing you properly at all right now. And then society is having a backlash against people like yourself. And so that's kind of like you're stuck in the middle ground between saying, I don't agree with everything that the trans movement's saying, but I also do genuinely suffer from this condition. And I'm aware I suffer from this condition. I just want to be accepted for it. Um, it's a tricky thing. I don't disagree that it's a really tricky situation that society is in right now. Um, how about this? Here's a tough question. I'm going to just ask you all the tough questions. In terms of when it comes to kids, when it comes to 11 and 12, 13, needing to go on hormone blockers right before puberty, are you pro that?
Yes, because I actually do have experience with this. I come from a more conservative area. My family is kind of religious and they're more conservative. I've had multiple therapists who suggested that I should go on hormone blockers when I was about 12 or 13. But my parents, they viewed them as just being drugs. And so they didn't let me go on to that. So I really feel like for people who suffer with early onset gender dysphoria, and so that's gender dysphoria that starts when you're like very little.
Hmm.
That's definitely something that should be allowed. It really, they can be life saving in so many instances. Um, because when you're because there's these are children who before puberty are already having severe struggles with gender dysphoria, so they're already having challenges. Yeah, and I had those same challenges, and so going through puberty into a gender that you don't identify with, that can be really traumatizing. And another thing is that, like a lot of people, they do talk about like how the side effects of puberty blockers are permanent,
Hmm.
but puberty itself is permanent. And then we also talk about detransitioners who did go on hormones wrongfully. And I sympathize with them completely. But I feel like a lot of people who are empathizing, they have selective empathy because what those detransitioners are going through, like say having a deep voice, I guess, broader shoulders or whatever
Well,
change.
there's a lot more than that with detransitioning. I mean, especially if they've undergone the procedures, the surgeries.
Mhm.
I mean, there's people who have sadly, died, even committed suicide. Same idea. High rates of suicide among people who want to detransition and things like that. Um, Look, I empathize. My problem with kids is that, again, if we're to agree that there's a social phenomenon taking place where kids are not your category, but other groups of kids are incentivized in many ways in their social circle to just identify as transgender, and then they're exposed to doctors who tell them, okay, let's put you on hormone blockers, when these kids are not truly suffering from gender dysphoria. A 12-year-old kid, an 11-year-old kid can't make the decision that they want to smoke for the next, 8 years or whatever it is. They can't make the decision that they want to drink for the next 9 to 10 years. They can't make the decision to have consensual sex for the next uh, six years, depending on where they are, which state. So we're they can't get a tattoo for the next 6 years. I mean, these are really babies. They're babies, and so to give them a decision that is life altering, I think that's where a lot of people, and I understand that you see it as, and I can understand your perspective because you went through it, you didn't get the treatment that you felt you needed, and now you're in a position to say, well, okay, so I have to do other things, but you can at least make those decisions as an adult from a position of knowing that now it's right. And I fully support, by the way, I just want you to know this, I fully support adults doing whatever they want. They want to have gender reassignment surgery, whatever they need to do to feel better about themselves. There was a movement to try and stop that from happening. I'd be out there on the marching line with you to say, no, this is an adult. We live in a free country. They should be allowed to do it. But I'm very protective of children. And I don't think that children are in a position to make those decisions, sadly.
Yeah. So that's where I would agree, but I think that's exactly why puberty blockers shouldn't be banned. Because for people like me who actually genuinely do and did suffer from gender dysphoria, they can't make the decision to go through those irreversible changes. And like I was saying, with detransitioners, they had to go through irreversible changes that they can never become who they were before. And they have to suffer with that every day, because they wrongfully transitioned. That's the same thing that people with gender dysphoria who have to go through puberty as the gender they don't identify with. That's the same thing they have to go through, and that they can transition as adults. I can obviously still transition, but there's a whole lot of things that you cannot do anymore. Like for a lot of trans people, their voice will always be a very deep voice, sounding like a man. They'll have broad shoulders. They'll be very tall. There's not a lot they can do to actually pass as the gender they identify as. And that can be socially and emotionally damaging. And a lot of trans people also don't survive that experience. So, yeah, I understand that detransitioners do commit suicide at high rates. And I think that's for obvious reasons. But it's the same with trans people who've gone through
Of
puberty.
course. So I think that, like you had said, gender dysphoria, there's something else going on that has to be treated. In my ideal world, especially with children, we would try and treat the underlying cause of what is motivating this before putting people on medication, just like we do with anything else. Like, listen, I've suffered from depression. I would hope that a doctor's first line of treatment was not to put me on heavy medication, but even those heavy medications as a child are not permanent in the way that hormone blockers are. This is the hardest part of the debate. For me, it's kind of like a line in the sand is when we touch kids and tell them to you know what I mean? When we start interrupting kids' natural biological process. Uh, because again, and a large percentage of kids who identify as trans nowadays, because of this aspect of it being a social phenomenon, do not end up identifying when they're adults as the other gender. When you leave them alone, they might grow up and be homosexual, they might grow up and be whatever they grow up to be, but they don't grow up to desire, like you do right now, to fully transition and undergo gender reassignment surgery. You were right when you said that the amount of adults who genuinely want to go through gender reassignment surgery and undergo the difficult process that is a small percentage of society. But there's, again, a much larger percentage of society that is doing this in my opinion, for the wrong reasons. Like I said, not suffering from gender dysphoria, this social phenomenon, and they're lumped in together with you. And that creates a problem in the entire movement and the entire way society can approach it. Again, in all those areas, like, you're saying case by case basis, but very hard to go on a case by case basis for who we allow into a woman's shelter, where we put biological men who identify as women in prison. Maybe again, if they underwent gender reassignment surgery, they had no chance of raping a woman or anything of that kind. I would say that it's a much more open dialogue as to what prison they should go to. But so long as we're allowing men who are still capable of doing that into prison with women, and these are areas that society is going to push back against the trans movement.
Right. I think that's valid. But I think what's important here is the distinction between early onset gender dysphoria and what's called late onset gender dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
In 2023, I think it was in December, they published an article that did some research on detransitioners, and they found that more than 80% of detransitioners did not meet the criteria for early onset gender dysphoria. They had late onset gender dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, and there's the articles of sexual behavior. They've also published a lot of other studies. But basically, the difference is those people with early onset gender dysphoria, there is criteria for having early onset gender dysphoria. And
You know what it is by any chance?
I do. So yeah. So one major thing is that early onset gender dysphoria. It's not the same as being gay, but it's connected with homosexuality. Like a lot of researchers have said that it's a more extreme version of homosexuality. So basically, every person with early onset gender dysphoria is going to be homosexual. So they're not going to be like, if it's a male, they're not going to be attracted to women.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is that they will, from their earliest memories, identify as the other gender. And actually, for some, it's even earlier. Like my mom told me that she could tell even when I was like really little, I think like one, that I was probably going to be gay or trans. And obviously, I can't remember that, but she said she noticed it, and she didn't want that for me, so she tried to discourage it. But
So that's the most fascinating part of all this, because like I see these kind of woke parents who I could tell are motivating their kids, like they want to have a trans kid. You see it with celebrities nowadays. Every celebrity has a they them child now, or a trans child, or they themselves are coming out as trans. Like it's just become such a thing to do, to all of a sudden, like if you're a left-leaning white celebrity, right, that's like the way you suddenly become part of a minority group, which they believe will make them important. But in your specific case, you're not. You're from a conservative family. This is who you were from birth, essentially. Again, I think the difficult part is drawing that distinction on an individual case by case basis. It's very difficult nowadays because I don't trust doctors anymore. I feel like doctors have become activists, and I think that I've seen it firsthand. And there's everything is so taboo around this that even if someone, you ever see, there's this guy Steven Crowder. He did a video where he went into a clinic dressed as a woman. He's obviously a man. He's like 6'4". He's built like a man, clearly a very big man. He had stubble, but he just put on a wig and said he's a woman. And what he did is he took the urine from a pregnant woman. Now, when a man has test positive on a pregnancy test, it can imply prostate cancer because they release the same kind of, for whatever reason. So, and doctors know this. And he did the test in the clinic. He wanted to see if he was pregnant in the clinic. He obviously can't be pregnant. And it came back positive. And so they should have informed him, hey, you might have testicular cancer. It's testicular cancer, not prostate cancer. Testicular cancer. You might have testicular cancer. You need to go see a doctor. But they were too scared to even tell him, hey, you need to get checked for cancer. In other words, he would have died. This is how far it's gone. If this was a real story, he could develop advanced cancer and die because doctors are too scared to acknowledge his biological sex. I mean, these are just things that are happening in society that are ridiculous. They're absurd. And I think that, again, I think you and your specific category of people who genuinely suffer gender dysphoria from birth, are getting the worst end of it. But again, I don't know the answer because I still don't think we have a definition for a man without creating exceptions. I still don't know where we put people in prison. I still don't. Sports is a big one. You know, I did that video. I got a lot of backlash for it. I still get a lot of hate for it for saying that. I think it was just a video of a woman who. Did you see it by any chance?
I'm not sure I saw it.
So it's just a video of a young girl. She grows up. She wants to be an athlete. She wants to be competitive. And it's like you said, she ends up in the final race of her life. That's a big race. Her dad has been backing her whole life. And then she has to compete against a biological male. And even though she's the best female runner in the world, she's not the best male runner in the world, right? She's not even close. And she loses the opportunity. And I got a lot of support for that video from women. And I got a lot of backlash from people who support the trans community. And I was just saying, hey, we can't protect trans people at the expense of completely sacrificing women's rights. Do you see this as a problem, or for you, is it?
I 100% do. And as I was saying earlier, there's very few trans people who actually are in sports of any kind. And so these, I guess these biological males that you see competing against women, especially, and it's become so prominent in the past few years, they're not trans. They say they are trans, but no, I firmly believe that they are not trans.
So you think they're just gaming the system, or they have something else going on and they want to identify as that for other reasons?
I think it's something else that's going on. I don't think this is a malicious attempt to hurt women or game the system. I think there's a lot of things going on. One thing that I've heard from some researchers is autogynephilia.
Can you explain what that is? I don't know what that is.
Okay. So it's a very, very odd phenomenon, I would say. But basically something that occurs in straight men sometimes is that they become attracted to the idea of themselves as the opposite gender, so as a woman. And so that not all people with this condition transition, but some people will have it strong enough to where they will feel like it's an actual gender dysphoria, even though even though these people have not had any previous history of dysphoria. So they will transition and they'll want all the same rights that a trans person or a woman would have. And so, they say that 75% of all male people who identify as transgender nowadays has autogynephilia.
Wow, that's super interesting.
And when it comes to sports, that number is probably more like 98%.
You need to be doing more interviews, in my opinion, because like you're really good at articulating stuff that I think a lot of people need to hear. I've been accused of being transphobic many, many times. Whether you feel I am or not, I don't believe I am. I'm not scared of trans people, and there's no fear there for it to be a phobia. I do have certain fears that society is losing touch with objective reality sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually curious if you see this happening. Do you believe that there's a certain degree of like moral relativism where there's no kind of consistent streamline of anything anymore? For example, what if I came and I said, "Hey, I identify as a 12-year-old." But really, why in today's world is that wrong? If there's no standard for anything, like I understand what you're calling for is standards. You're saying that gender dysphoria is a real medical condition. It has always been a medical condition. It has existed throughout all of history. Now there's also a social phenomenon attached to this, but we have to be able to distinguish between the two, protect people who have gender dysphoria, and look at why this social phenomenon is happening, where a huge percentage of the population might be latching onto different identities or whatever it is. But they don't really represent, and they shouldn't be lumped in with the people who have this genuine condition. I think most people, by the way, who supported my video, who support my views, would also agree with that point. The question is, how do we accommodate people like yourself in society without putting anyone else at risk? I think is a very tough conversation to have. I think we started having it today. I don't think there's an easy solution to all those things. I think we're going to disagree on prisons, sports, and those things. I just think inherently we're going to have certain disagreements there, and that's okay. But this is the first time that I've seen someone express your point of view in a way that I'm like, okay, well, all of this makes sense to me. So pretty awesome. In terms of the age thing. So if I'm to accept that gender is a social construct, let's say there was this other thing called, like I said, BIP, right? And BIP is not age. BIP is the gender of age, right? To sex. So if gender is to sex, BIP is to age. And my BIP is 12 years old. And I go out in the world and I say, I don't want you to look at my age, which is my biological age. I want you to look at my self identified BIP. My BIP is 12. And because I'm 12, I should be able to go into spaces for 12-year-olds. I should be able to hang out with 12-year-olds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a pretty disturbing idea, but it's actually been proposed by groups. And that's another problem where we don't have specific guidelines in society.
Right. Yeah. So I would definitely agree with you there. I think there's just a lot going on now, with I guess it's just a part of the ongoing issue we have with political polarization. And so there's just a lot. I don't know. I guess it's just.
Where do you think this social phenomenon? You see, no, you're very, very smart. So I'm just curious what you think. Where do you think all this is coming from? Social phenomenon, the you know the things that I see as negatives are like hyper obsession with identity. Like people's race. If you go back, Martin Luther King, judge a person by their character, not by the color of their skin. I feel like we've gone, especially on the left, completely backwards. There's a complete backshift in the country on that side to say, no, your race is what matters. No, your identity, you as a trans person, is more important than who you are as a person. To me, it's not, right? To me, who you are is more important than the fact that you're trans. It's irrelevant to me. But that makes me a bad person by today's standards. Where do you think all that's coming from?
Yeah, so I think it is just political polarization, but I think also kind of what's accompanying that is, I think it is a part of political polarization, but just I think modern movements we're having, like for example, feminism,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not saying I disagree with feminism at all, but I think in the past few years that I think feminism has encouraged a lot of more gender confusion among
Mm-hmm.
adolescents and young adults.
Well, especially as third wave feminism transitioned into, I don't know if there's fourth wave feminism, what they call it now, but there's
Right.
been a weird decline of feminism. That's my personal, used to be about empowering women, but gender roles were okay. It wasn't something to be looked at down on. And now we're telling women, no, if you're a stay at home mom, you don't have the same value as a CEO. Well, I'm sorry. I don't see it that way. I see it as it's not wrong for a man to be a provider, protector, and it's not wrong for a woman to be a mother and to take care of the home. And if they don't want to do that and they want to go out and be a CEO and they should have that opportunity too. But we've devalued certain traditional values, and it's had a major impact on society.
Right. Yeah, I
So
100% agree.
I'm glad you said that. You should have your own show on some kind of platform, because I think you'd get a lot of people to think more openly about issues.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you wanna touch on? I mean, you've been great so far. Maybe we'll get you back on if people have questions. Oh, I have one more thing I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
So the main thing that people who follow my company and even myself have a very strong reaction to, and I could say this as someone who owns a company, and I don't think you're going to give much of disagreement on this, is all the diversity, equity, inclusion standards that are now being imposed on society. Again, I think that those things hurt you. They don't help you. They hurt all the people genuinely suffering from whatever the thing may be, gender dysphoria, or someone who's actually a victim of racism. I think that you look at these new standards applied onto companies and all this kind of fake push to, like, oh, representation, all this is having a major negative impact, and part of the reason so many people are having backlash toward people like yourself. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on all. And do you know all the DEI standards now on companies and all this stuff?
I know a little bit about it. Um, yeah. From what I've heard, I guess So basically, is DEI, is that like where they're basically like hiring people based on like their race or gender?
Pretty much, like even airlines are doing this now. They're saying, well, we don't have enough women pilots, female pilots, or whatever it may be, trans pilots, based on
Mhm.
race. It's literally based on quotas. And I can tell you this, even as an actor, I now, because I've acted on a lot of shows and stuff, I get asked, like, what is your nationality? Are you a minority? So my mother's from Iraq. So I
Mhm.
mentioned I'm Iraqi so they can get a DEI credit toward casting me. And it's absolutely ridiculous in my view. And it's racist in many ways, and it kind of devalues me even getting the part. But uh, it's with airlines, like I said, they it doesn't matter if you meet the standards. In the military now, they're starting to do it. They're starting to say we need more women in the Marines and the special forces. So, if you're a force recon Marine and they don't have enough women in your platoon, they have to put women in to meet the standards that the government is now setting. It doesn't matter if you're as good; they'll lower the standards to meet that in these very physical, important jobs. So, uh, yeah, that's what DEI is.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I do agree with you. I definitely don't like the idea of hiring somebody or discriminating against anybody, regardless of their race, for any reason. Yeah, I kind of grew up in this environment. I guess you could say I grew up in a socially conservative environment, but race was something that always was like a big thing in my family, and I never understood it. Because it seemed to me like, I guess it seemed to me like just people, including a lot of people in my family, would value someone's race above everything else. And I never understood that. So yeah, yeah, I do agree with you there. I think that as far as hiring and things like that go, it should be based solely on someone's qualifications. I don't want someone to be discriminated against because they're white, or because they're a man or whatever. Um, you know, I I guess I can see where some of the thought process comes from because minorities. I mean, it does feel good as a minority to see people that you can relate to on some level.
Hmm.
Um,
I agree with you there. I can say I've had that experience too. Yeah, I totally understand.
right, but I don't think that this is the right way to go about it.
Hmm. I
So
agree with you there too. I agree with a lot of what you said today. All right. Well, I mean, this was a great discussion. What was the name of the condition again, just so I can research it? Autonomophilia.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there's two forms. So the male form is called autogynephilia, and
Okay.
then there's also a female form called autoandrophilia.
Okay. And is there anything you want people watching to follow? If they want to follow you, if they have any questions, is there anything you want to put in the links below, or anything you want to shout out or send people to?
The only thing I want to say is that when it comes to trans people, and this goes to all people, whether they're on the left or on the right, just please do your research because there is a lot of research out there, and so many people are just ignoring it and just coming to their own conclusions based on what they see on the news or in reaction to just what people on the other side are saying. Just do your own research when it comes to this. I think that's so important because you're not going to get the correct answer unless you actually do research it yourself.
As a trans person, do you feel like you're under attack a bit by society, or?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm under attack by both the left and by the right. Um, I've I've had conversations with people who don't want to talk to me anymore simply because I felt like gender dysphoria was essential to who am as a trans person, or at least as a future
Hmm.
trans person, maybe.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've had people who don't want to talk to me at all anymore. But there's also people on the right who basically will say things like, nobody can know that they're trans. Trans isn't a thing. it's all just a made up thing. And that's also like just as harmful.
Yeah, gender dysphoria, I would hope that most people agree. I mean, there's a basis for this going back well before all the stuff that we're arguing now. Gender dysphoria is very much a real thing.
Right.
You said something just very interesting. I just have to ask this one last question. I won't go over 45 minutes here, but you said that you just described yourself as not yet a trans person. Do you define a trans person as someone who has undergone gender reassignment surgery or has made physical changes?
So I think that's I don't know. I guess I have kind of a mixed view on that. Basically, I mean, I can kind of sympathize with both views. Like, I can sympathize with people who say that you do need to go through surgery and you do need to fully present as a woman before you can be trans. I mean, I think that makes sense. But I can also sympathize with the idea that gender dysphoria is more so what makes you trans. Because even if you don't present as your gender yet, you still suffer with that gender dysphoria. You still feel like that gender. Other people may not see it because you don't present like that, but you still suffer with it.
Either definition is still very different than the standard definition pushed by the at least publicly trans movement right now, which is gender dysphoria is not necessarily part of it. It's just self-identification, and that biology is irrelevant to it, whether you go through gender reassignment surgery or not. So you are in a unique category, at least in terms of the people I've spoken to. Really curious to see what people think about this. I had a great time talking with you. I wish we could have more discussions like this. I think it would help everyone. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.